Right now I want to ask the president of this university to come to the stage, Dr. Linda Bennett. She became the third president of this university in July of 2009, after serving as provost and as vice president for academic affairs since 2003. In her first year as president, she led the effort to establish the university's first strategic plan. And I can tell you, I just retired from a university, and I know how important strategic plans are to a university. So would you please welcome Dr. Bennett.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome. I know we have a number of USI students, faculty, and staff here, but that we also have several members of the community. Welcome to the Performance Center at the University of Southern Indiana. It's great to have you here, and I cannot express how delighted we are at USI to have this third gubernatorial debate on our campus. And we're also just thrilled for the city of Evansville, because as the state's third largest city, it's about time. That's right. I want to give thanks to some important partners who helped make this possible. We are so grateful in working with them. I want to thank our media partners at the Courier Press, WFIE and WNIN, and especially our own faculty, staff, and students who, among many, many other things, develop the tickets, all the details that you can't see whenever you come to an event like this, but that are so important. But among other things, we have 4 students working the cameras tonight. So what a fantastic opportunity for learning in this setting, and also for learning as we listen to our political leaders. So we're really thrilled to have the debate here. It's wonderful to have you here this evening. So I want to say, with that, thank you. I know the candidates are soon going to be entering the hall, and we begin promptly at 6. So thank you for being here. Welcome to USI.
I'm ready for you.
Can we check your IFB?
I don't have one yet.
It's over here.
Oh, is it
Yeah.
over here? Okay. That's a heavy mother.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I'll just let you
I
want to
can
run it
help
up.
you get situated with
Well,
it.
what we'll
Wherever you're
do is we'll
comfortable.
run it up the back of
Yeah. We have 5 minutes. Yeah, grab your jacket. I'll get it.
Yeah, perfect.
Timekeepers.
Keep trying. Keep doing it.
Can you see the? No.
Yes.
We got her.
Yeah, and square away the camera right there.
She might even.
All right, that works for me.
I'll stay in my pocket. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Actually, if you put it near the pocket, it won't keep it.
How much time do you have?
Okay, now we got it.
Okay. Yeah.
Right here?
Probably already might be okay.
Yeah, no, I can hear you now.
He's got you.
Okay, can you check the back just to make sure that...
I see it now. Okay.
Okay.
You guys can check levels now. They have passed them now.
Okay, can you all check and make sure that the IFB is not showing on camera?
Check it real
How
quick.
does
Make sure
that
it's turned on.
How does the IFB look in the shop?
And you're good. All right, thank you.
Can you see his IFB? Do you want it adjusted? We're okay? It's good.
Okay, great.
You guys wanted a level?
Thank you.
Yeah. Can you give a level?
Check 1, 2, 3. Good evening and welcome to the Indiana Debate Commission's third and final
Mizell
gubernatorial debate. This debate is being televised from the Performance Center at the University of Southern Indiana in Evansville.
He's pretty quiet.
The
but
3 candidates here tonight want to
Can you
succeed.
speak a little more?
Sure.
louder?
Good evening. Check 1, 2, 3.
Mr. Holcomb, can you give us a mic level?
Yes, Eric Holcomb running for governor. Eric
go a
Holcomb
little
running
bit
for
louder?
governor. Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Running for governor. Good to be back on the campus
You
of
got it.
USI.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gregg, could you give us a mic level?
Go Cubs.
Keep going.
Hey,
Go
I'm from
Cubs.
Cleveland. Be careful with that.
199, 299, 399.
Keep going. Anything you like? I think, do you have him? Keep going.
Keep going? Well, I guess I'd say go Colts. Need more? You're still at it? Still walking? Still talking?
Yeah.
Live from Evansville, the Indiana Gubernatorial Debate, sponsored by the Indiana Debate Commission.
Good evening, and welcome to the Indiana Debate Commission's third and final gubernatorial debate. This debate is being televised from the Performance Center at the University of Southern Indiana in Evansville. The three candidates here tonight want to succeed Governor Mike Pence, a Republican who is Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate. I'm Mizell Stewart of the USA Today Network, and it is my pleasure to evening. It's also great to be back here in Evansville, where I served as editor of the Evansville Courier Press from 2007 to 2012. Our first debate focused on education. The second was on jobs and the economy. We are now turning our attention to health and social issues. For the next hour, the candidates will debate issues mostly focused on those topics. Many of the questions are drawn from those submitted by you, members of the voting public throughout Indiana. Some will be asked in person here by members of our audience. None of the questions has been shared in advance with any of the candidates. Here are our candidates. Eric Holcomb is the Republican candidate and is Indiana's lieutenant governor. John Gregg is the Democratic candidate and is a former Indiana House Speaker. Rex Bell is the Libertarian candidate and owns a small business. The candidates' positions on the stage and the order in which they will answer the questions were determined by lot conducted by the Debate Commission. After I ask a question, each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. Each candidate also will have a 30-second rebuttal opportunity, depending on the need. Before the final question, each candidate will be given an opportunity to address a topic of his choice. This allows candidates to discuss a topic they believe is important, but hasn't been touched on in the questions, or they can choose to elaborate on a topic discussed previously. At this time, each candidate will make a 1-minute opening statement. We'll begin with Mr. Holcomb.
Thank you, Mizell, and thank you to USI for hosting us. It's good to be back on the campus. Thank you to the Indiana Debate Commission for hosting all three of the debates, and thanks for even to the Cubs fans that are tuning in before the first pitch. I'd like to just say at the outset that Indiana has never been in a more prosperous position. Our unemployment rate is 4.5%, lower than the national average. We have more people working in the private sector than ever before in our 200-year history of the state, a healthy savings account, and a AAA credit rating. We've become a real leader nationally and internationally in ag, 21st century ag, and logistics and biosciences and manufacturing. To take us to the next level, I believe that we're going to have to focus on our people, our people, our people. If we equip our youngest people at the pre-K age and our high schoolers at the graduation level, when they have a ticket to their success going into a college or career, we will in fact take Indiana to the next level.
And now we'll hear from Mr. Gregg.
Thank you. I want to thank both my opponents for the civility of which we've conducted these debates. It's not at all been like that zoo that we've seen going on out at the national level, and I'd certainly be remiss if I didn't congratulate them for their conduct. I want to serve as Indiana's 51st governor. I believe Indiana can do better. I know all Hoosiers deserve better. As governor, I'll focus like a laser on the economy, on high-wage growth jobs. I'll focus on attracting businesses, not scaring them away. In education as governor, we'll stop teaching to the test. We'll see teachers as part of the solution, not the problem. And working with Glenda Ritz, we'll have pre-kindergarten for all students. I feel that as a former president of Vincennes University, a Speaker of the House, and businessman, I'm ready to govern and I'm ready to learn. Check out our positions at gregforgovernor.com.
Next, we'll hear from Mr. Bell.
Well, I'd like to thank the Indiana Debate Commission for including us this evening, and thank USI for hosting this debate. I've got a connection here. My two oldest children graduated from USI more years ago than I like to think. My plan for Indiana is to get government out of your way. There's things that we think individuals can do better than what the government can do. Certainly we would like to attract more jobs and better paying jobs to Indiana. We feel we can do that by eliminating the property tax, both for businesses and individuals. This is what government does to attract jobs already to just a few select businesses. We think we should do it to all businesses, and we'd have more businesses and jobs locating here than we could keep up with. We'd like to see all of our road use taxes spent on the roads. We'd like to return control of the schools to the parents and teachers and the local boards, get it away from Washington and the state, let the people that care most about the children do it.
Thank you. Now, on to our questions. Our first question will be asked by Danielle Norris, a web developer here at the University of Southern Indiana.
As governor, would you support the expansion of needle exchange programs? And how would you assist the increasing number of Hoosiers who are dependent on illegal and prescription drugs?
Our first response will come from Mr. Holcomb.
Yes, this is an issue that is strangling not just our families, but communities across the whole state, in fact, across the whole nation. And we need to continue to explore every way that we can to not just solve the problem for one community, but to really kill the whole drug epidemic itself. We're going to have to focus on making sure that we're preventing, that we're enforcing, and that we're treating, most importantly, the families and individuals that are caught up in this scourge. Yes, to the needle exchange program, we need to make sure that that's more efficient, and if we have to change the law to do it, we will, and that will require legislative action. It will require legislative action to make it so that locals can more quickly identify and act on the problem and not wait on the state to make sure that they get the resources that they need. But this is an all-hands on deck effort, and it is a top priority in my administration.
Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. Now to Mr. Gregg.
Thank you. Again, if you check out, we have a 7-point public safety plan, and the first thing that it mentions, it's about drugs, and it's about that crisis. Indiana's first in methamphetamines, and 5th in heroin, and 15th in overdose deaths. I've been traveling the state listening to Hoosiers talking about this, and yes, I support the needle exchange. The truth of the matter is, we have got to change the way we look at drugs. For the dealer and the trafficker, they need locked up. To the violent criminal, they need locked up. But to many Hoosiers, we need to realize this is a medical issue, and we need to treat it as such. And we need to realize that rehabilitation works. For every dollar we put in rehab, we save $4 in public health dollars and $7 in the criminal justice system. We can do better. We cannot afford just to continue to build prisons. Rehabilitation works, and check out our full program at gregforgovernor.com.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Now, Mr. Bell.
Well, you know, if we look at what we've accomplished in the last 50 years of the drug war, we have to say nothing. You know, the addiction rate is the same as it was 50 years ago. So what are we doing? How are we going to continue this same thing? I say we need to make a change. We need to stop treating drug addiction as a crime. We need to treat it as an illness. We need to decriminalize a lot so that when people need help, they can step forward without fear of being arrested. The needle exchange program, you know, there's a lot of political input on that, a lot of play from both sides. But when we stop and look at it, it's not something that can't be done privately. You know, needles cost 7 cents. You know, we've seen instances in West Virginia and different states around where private individuals and private organizations have set up a needle exchange at the local pharmacy. It's something we can do. There's a lot we can do that doesn't involve government force.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Our next question will also come from the audience and will be asked by Amy Kelly of Seymour, Director for the Mentor Network, which provides residential community-based services for workers with disabilities. On to your question.
Thank you. The unemployment rate for people with disabilities is 80%, although many people with disabilities can and want to work. What will you do to create employment opportunities for people with disabilities to have access to job training and careers that will increase their independence?
We'll start with Mr. Gregg.
Thank you. The first thing we need to do in Indiana is to take a look at how we're doing our training right now. You know, as I travel the state, I have employers tell me that they never talk about taxes, but they do talk about needing employees. And right now we are doing training through the governor's office, some through the workforce development office, some through what's called the WISB boards, which are federal, some through Ivy Tech, some through VU, and there's really not a lot of communications. I think we can do a much better job if we have all these groups talking to one another so we find out what is working, what's not working, and what we're training people for. Another thing that we mentioned that we think is real important is the state's bidding processes have been changed over the last few years where they really work to a detriment of small business owners, particularly people with developmental disabilities and minorities and veterans. The bids are much too big and too large for startup companies to bid on. So we talk about making them much more easier for those folks to access.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Mr. Bell, it is your turn.
You know, when we talk about unemployment and we look at it when everybody's involved, and the people, you know, people without disabilities have a leg up on being able to get that job. And what we need to consider is, are there enough jobs out there? What can we do to create more jobs? And as I mentioned before, you know, if we did away with the property tax, attracted more businesses to the state, there would be more jobs. We would have businesses competing for workers instead of workers competing for the jobs. And I think that's something that we need to consider. The best thing we can do to help everybody, whether you're disabled or not, is make a situation where there are more jobs available. And I think we can do that, as I say, with doing away with the property tax is going to solve a lot of the problems that we're looking at in Indiana and trying to figure out another way of fixing it. I think we already have the answer if we just take it.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. On to Mr. Holcomb.
Well, I agree with both on two issues. One, people aren't talking about taxes because we have them at a very reasonable level here in the state of Indiana, and I take that as a compliment. Two, Mr. Bell is correct in the sense that what we have to do is make sure that we're building an economy and a jobs market magnet that lifts all boats. Specifically when it comes to those who are disabled, our work will never be done on this front. We need to make sure that we're focused on what they are able to do. And transforming our Department of Workforce Development can go a long way on this front. We need to make sure there are local providers like the Muncie Teaching Hotel that are providing skills to those who are disabled, creative ways to get folks into the job force. And so with the Department of Workforce Development and with local partnerships, this will go a long way.
Thank you. Let me remind you that tonight's debate focuses on health and social issues facing Hoosiers, and our next question was submitted by Mitchell Smith, a graduate student in Indianapolis. Gentlemen, Indiana is ranked 48th in public health funding at just $39 per person. Indiana is ranked 41st in overall health and also ranks high in the percentage of people who are obese and diabetic. Indiana is also ranked 47th in air quality. Given all of this, what do you plan to do about investing in the health of Hoosiers? And let me remind the folks watching via television and live stream that this is a question that has particular resonance here in southwestern Indiana between local health indicators and the presence of coal-fired power plants. And so on this question, we will turn first to Mr. Bell.
Well, there's a lot of parts to that question. Certainly, we expect the government to protect us from force and fraud, and if somebody's polluting the air, we need to step up and put an end to that. As far as the obesity problem, that's something that we have to look at and say, is that the proper role of government, or is that something that we can handle as a society? And I say as a society, we have a better shot at handling that type of thing. That's a lot of this. What we need to do is consider how we can steer society towards these areas. Certainly, and whenever we have a company, a corporation coming in with jobs, and they're wanting to keep a healthy workforce, they are invested in that type of a situation, and that's what we need to work for. Other than government protecting us from somebody forcing something on us, we need to step back from that.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Now to Mr. Holcomb.
Well, yes, there are many, many parts to that question. Some concern behavior and choices that we make. If we're talking about obesity, we need to make sure that there are no food deserts, and that's a local issue that we need to really get at, so that folks don't have to, they're not restricted to healthy food options. We need to make sure that our communities are connected. We made huge progress in 2005 building out our trail systems all over the state of Indiana. This was a big part of our Regional Cities Initiative to make sure that our communities were actually vibrant communities that encouraged staying in shape, keeping in shape. If you are smoking, we know there is an adverse connection between smoking and obesity. I would encourage folks to take advantage of the 1-800-QUIT-NOW. There are all kinds of resources available at our FSSA, our Family and Social Service Agency, and I would encourage people to call if you are under the grips of smoking. 1-800-QUIT-NOW. And
finally, Mr. Gregg.
Indiana does rank so badly. We need to speak proper if I'm at a university, don't I? Indiana ranks so badly when it comes to public health, but you can directly relate that to the priority we put on it by being one of the 5 lowest states. We see that in the obesity, we see that in the diabetes and all the other issues. I recently met with people from Riley Children's Hospital and talked about the problems we have in Indiana, that in some cases just basic education would go a long way. Infant mortality rate. Sometimes it's education, sometimes it's telling mothers not to sleep with their children, and sometimes it's educating them not to smoke. We also see problems in Indiana caused by public health by the lack of priority we put in this area. Like our caseworkers supposed to just be dealing with just 12 cases, but in reality they're dealing with up in the 20s and higher. And adult protective service persons dealing with over 200 to 300. This is no way to take care of a population.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. We received many questions on Keith Cooper, a man who was released from prison after witnesses recanted and DNA evidence cleared him. Governor Pence has refused to pardon Mr. Cooper and has instructed him to go back to the courts. How do you believe the power of the pardon should be used, and would you use it in Mr. Cooper's case? We'll start with Mr. Holcomb.
Reviewing what I have on this case, which as I'm not governor yet, I want to make sure that I actually can talk to Mr. Cooper and review the facts of the case. I understand where Governor Pence is coming from. This would be an unprecedented pardon. Having said that, knowing the facts as I do now and wanting to accumulate more, I would look forward to quickly exonerating, quickly pardoning, swiftly, if the facts bear that out.
Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. Now to Mr. Gregg.
Based on what I've read, I would pardon I would pardon him immediately. I've traveled the state, and this has been a huge news item and a concern. I think any governor would realize that this is something you need to do on a case-by-case basis and know the facts, much like my friend Mr. Holcomb said. But there comes a time when you have to make a decision, and the facts in this are pretty clear. I take this charge real serious as somebody seeking the office of governor, and have had these discussions with members of the Indiana State Police Alliance, the organization of our state troopers that have endorsed me, and I'm very proud of that endorsement as also the members of the Fraternal Order of the Police. So I take crime and law and order serious, but when the system's made a mistake, we need to correct it immediately and move on.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Now to Mr. Bell.
Yes, I think he should be pardoned immediately. I've followed this case, and you have to take a look at it and say, whenever something like this comes up, definitely the burden of proof should be on the state always. And if there is any question at all, and certainly in a case like this where there's no question the man was innocent, he needs to be pardoned. I can't understand. It's one of those situations where we're saying we need to protect the government instead of protecting the individuals, and we shouldn't be doing that. The individual should always be first. And if we start worrying about, we're worried about the protocol, what has happened before, what kind of precedent it would set. If we set a precedent for releasing innocent people from prison, I would say that would be a good one to set.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. We're now going to turn back to the audience. Brett Butel, an Evansville attorney, will ask the next question. Mr. Butel.
Thank you. What role will your faith play in your decisions you make as governor? Where do you draw the line between your own religious beliefs and what is best for the interests of all Hoosiers?
Thank you, Mr. Butel. Mr. Gregg will respond first.
I am a person of faith, and like many people in our nation, I happen to belong to the Christian faith. But I also realize there are people of other faiths and some people of no faith, and I respect that. And I think that is the same way you will find that I will govern. I will respect all peoples. I think that is what we're called to do. I'm going to take an oath to respect people and uphold our Constitution and to treat people equally. Whereas my faith is something that is very important to me. I'm not running to force my ideology or my faith on someone else. Rather than stand on the street corner, I'll use a biblical analogy, rather than stand on the street corner and offer public prayers, I'd rather people know that I'm a person of faith by my actions.
Very good. Next, Mr. Bell.
Well, certainly, my faith is important to me, but as John pointed out, it's not something I want to force on other people. If you've done any reading at all on the Libertarian Party, that's what we are all about. We look at the individual. Every individual has rights, and if you get 40 individuals together, they don't have more rights than a single individual. So for me to decide that since the bulk of the nation is a Christian nation, that we should follow Christian teachings, that's not for me to say, that's not for me to decide for you. So certainly we would separate our faith from our governing ideals, and I hope everybody would do that.
Mr. Bell, thank you very much. Mr. Holcomb, bring it home.
As governor, I too would respect all faiths and those of no faith at all. I consider myself a Matthew 6 Christian and someone who tries to live out my faith. I think there are many lessons in the good book that instruct me privately, and I will continue to take that approach as governor, but one that would absolutely try to live it and not have to profess it. I understand the power of witness, but I think that you can get that in watching how someone actually lives their life.
Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. Speaking of expressions of faith and values, one voter asked about Indiana's ban on the sale of alcohol on Sunday. Would your administration support modifying or eliminating the ban? Why or why not? And we'll start with Mr. Bell.
Well, I've always maintained that anything that's legal on Saturday should be legal on Sunday. Regardless regardless of how I feel about it, and I'm not a drinker, I'm not going to buy it on Saturday, and I'm not going to buy it on Sunday. But if somebody wants to, this is left over from the blue laws of years ago. You couldn't sell cars on Sunday. You can't sell. You can sell maybe cold beer in one situation, and in another situation you can. And you get into a situation where a store can legally be selling warm beer, and if the power goes off and the heat goes out and the beer gets too cold, all of a sudden he's breaking the law. I think that's something that we need to look at and do away with the blue laws and certainly allow Sunday sales.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Next, Mr. Holcomb.
Well, I don't favor it. I think alcohol is still a legally controlled substance in the state of Indiana, and we need to make sure that we're able to do that. And making sure that our excise police have the resources to be able to cover the territory that they need to. I think this doesn't put an undue burden on folks who need to have a drink on a Sunday. I think they can plan accordingly 6 days prior.
All right. And now, Mr. Gregg.
Well, when you plan for these, you spend a lot of time planning on a lot of questions, but that wasn't one I thought we'd be asked about, how people would decide how they'd vote for governor. I would want to see the piece of legislation, and let me tell you why. It is a controlled substance, and just the idea that anybody could sell it without having the proximities and all, there's some concerns on that. But I think if the legislature sent me a bill to allow Sunday sales, I would very likely sign it. Having given it a lot of thought, I would want to see how that debate played out, and I'd want to listen to retailers and consumers. But contrary to what my mother's going to say, and she's here tonight, she's not going to like my answer, but I would very likely sign it.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Well, we're going to continue on the theme of controlled substances with a question from Jason Straw, who's a retired Air Force nurse from the Indianapolis area. And Jason wanted to know, why is it that we have not allowed cannabis to become a medical treatment for children with untreatable diseases? We allow medicines such as ketamine, a derivative of PCP, to be used in pediatric surgery, methamphetamine to be used to treat ADHD, and oxycodone for pain. But we won't allow patients to even try cannabis. The question is why? And we'll start with Mr. Holcomb.
Well, because having a discussion about legalizing drugs at this time seems to be off-key. And when you read about story after story after story about the drug busts that are occurring that have marijuana and heroin, this is of great concern. I understand the distinction between medical marijuana and legalizing it wholesale. I would want to talk a lot more with the medical professionals who say there are no other alternatives for these children. Make sure that the children are receiving the treatment that they need. And if only medical marijuana could suffice, then I'd entertain that as an option. But right now, in the world that we're living in, expanding or legalizing drugs of this nature isn't on my list.
Very good. Now to Mr. Gregg.
This is a very serious matter, and I would support, as I did back in 2012, I would support medical marijuana. I think this is something that if it would be a benefit to a patient, they should be allowed to use it. Since the last election, I lost my father to cancer of the esophagus. And it was a very painful death and not a fun one to observe in the last year of Dad's life. The doctors never said anything about cannabis or medical marijuana, but had they have, we should have had that right to let my dad use that to alleviate pain and suffering, as I believe we should do. And I would support medical marijuana as I did the last time.
Thank you. And now to Mr. Bell.
Well, yes, I would support medical marijuana, and I think, we're going to see after this election there's going to be more states that are supporting it already, or allowing it, and, it's a matter of Indiana is going to do it. I don't know exactly when, but eventually we're going to allow it. It's something we need to step out in front of and get it done. There's so much that we could do. Not only helping people that need it in their sickness, we have been proven to be a help in alleviating some of the opiate addiction that's going on around here that we're having so much trouble with. So there's more than one reason to legalize it. As I say, and along with that, even with the industrial hemp that we need to bring back in, it's a plant that has been made illegal years and years ago, and we need to re-legalize.
Mr. Holcomb, would you like to have a 30-second rebuttal opportunity?
I remain where I originally stood.
All right.
I have not flip-flopped.
All right. Thank you very much. Our next question was suggested by a resident of Indianapolis. Recently, a federal judge put on hold House Enrolled Act 1337 and is described as the most restrictive anti-abortion bill to come out of the state legislature. What is your position on abortion and birth control? And we will start with Mr. Gregg.
I have always been and consider myself a pro-life Democrat. With that said, I do not believe it's my business to interject myself in issues between a woman and her physician. I don't believe legislators should be practicing medicine. I have always supported the funding of Planned Parenthood, even though personally being opposed to abortion, because the truth of the matter is, all of the money that they get from taxpayers goes to provide birth control and health screenings and cutting down on STDs and mammograms. I mean, that's what the money's for. If we're talking about births, the problems are the unwanted children. We need to make that more accessible. I would have vetoed that bill. There were many, many members of the legislature who had been pro-life candidates for years, got up and spoke against it in a bipartisan fashion. That bill goes above and beyond. It stopped Indiana University from doing $140 million worth of research on Alzheimer's and cancer and things like that. It's just wrong.
Very good. And now Mr. Bell.
Well, certainly the bill was too restrictive. I'm opposed to abortion. I also understand that it is a problem that will never be solved politically. I think that in a situation like this bill, where it stepped in between a woman and her doctor, that was wrong. I think one of the best things we can do about abortion is make sure that we keep the federal government out of it, allow the states to make these decisions. I don't believe that all states will decide the same. I believe that if a person is 100% pro-life or 100% pro-choice, they'll never be satisfied with a decision handed down by the government anyway. But we do need to take it back to the states and the individuals and keep the federal government out of it.
And we'll conclude this question with Mr. Holcomb.
Well, I am pro-life. I understand this debate has been going on for decades, and there are good people on both sides. However, having said that, I don't believe I personally have the right to take another innocent life. And while my agenda will focus on economic development, community development, striving for excellence in education, and delivering good government at a great taxpayer value, if legislation like this does come down the pike and make its way to my desk, I will be working with those legislators long before it arrives so that hopefully we can avoid any impressions that may have occurred along the way.
Thank you very much. Now we come to the segment of our debate in which candidates can speak on a topic of their choice. Mr. Holcomb will go first and can talk for up to 1 minute. Mr. Bell will follow on that same topic for a maximum of 2 minutes. Mr. Gregg will also speak on that topic for up to 2 minutes. And then we will conclude the first round with Mr. Holcomb, who can close out the topic with up to 1 minute of rebuttal. The other two candidates will then have the same opportunity to speak on a topic of their choice, following the normal rotation and format. And so we will start with Mr. Holcomb.
My topic involves public service. I have long appreciated serving a cause greater than myself. That may have started when I signed up to join the United States Navy. That took me at service at home and abroad. I later then went to work for other strong leaders, including former Governor Mitch Daniels, including United States Senator Dan Coates, and now our Governor Mike Pence. When he called, I wasn't seeking this job, but when he did call, I jumped at a nanosecond, put aside what I was working on at the time to help a cause greater than myself. Because of public service, we are able to do so much when we're focused, and working with these leaders throughout my entire life, I've learned a few things. I've learned to focus and I've learned to prioritize what. And that's why I'm so laser focused on my 4-point plan to make sure that we get Indiana to the next level.
Mr. Bell, you have 2 minutes.
Well, certainly public service is important. I think a lot of what we need to do as public servants is to guide government in a position where it's helpful to everybody, not as a matter of transferring wealth from one citizen to another, not transferring wealth from citizens to selected companies, not making our moral decisions for us, not making our educational choices for us. I think one of the best things we can do as a public servant is to lead government out of people's way. And that's what I would try to do. I understand that there are people that have been involved in politics their whole life. And, you get into a situation where it's the same group of people making the same rules. Basically, I believe we shouldn't be making rules. We should be removing rules. If it's not a law that protects people from force and fraud, it really shouldn't be on the books. That's something that's better left up to society.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Gregg, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I believe in public service. I'm very proud to have been a candidate for governor in 2012 and this time, and I'm proud of the service many years ago when I served in the Indiana General Assembly. But I'm equally proud of having been a small businessman and made a payroll and been president at Vincennes University. But I learned that when I was a member of the Indiana House of Representatives, that not one party had the best ideas. The best ideas shouldn't be called Democrat or Republican. They should be called good or bad. I served as Speaker of the House, the presiding officer, for 6 years. And during 2 of those 6 years, we were tied with 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. Now, almost all politicians you hear say, I can work with the other side of the aisle. Trust me, when you're tied 50-50, you've worked with the other side of the aisle. The whole time that I was Speaker, the Senate was controlled by the Republican Party. So every piece of legislation, cutting the inventory tax, cutting our excise tax, funding schools and infrastructure, those all landed on the governor's desk with Democrat and Republican support. I'm very proud of that. As I've traveled the state and I've listened and I've learned from Hoosiers all across the state, they're tired of partisan politics. And I have a record of, like I said, of reaching across the aisle. And I'm very proud that in my last term as Speaker of the House, I won a national award by Governing Magazine for being the Public Official of the Year. But I shared it with Brian Bosma, who's now the Republican Speaker of the Indiana House of Representatives. And we won the award because we worked together in a spirit of bipartisan cooperation on tax restructuring and doing away with Indiana's excise tax.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Mr. Holcomb, you can close it out.
Well, one of the things that I'm most proud about my state government public service, coming to state government in 2005, was I saw people who used to be cynics, who used to believe things just couldn't get done, started to believe because they were driving on. I drove on I-69 to get down here today. We had person after person after person say that they never thought I-69 would get done in their lifetime. We have made record investments in education. In the last budget, we increased education spending by $474 million. We have made record investments in infrastructure. We have made record creative, innovative investments into our health care, ensuring over 400,000 of the neediest Hoosiers under our Healthy Indiana Plan 2.0. These are the kind of things that we've been able to do over the last 12 years in a bipartisan way and get this state moving again.
Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. Our next round will begin with Mr. Bell. You have 1 minute on a topic of your choice.
Well, I guess I get to use a microphone now. The topic of my choice always goes back to the same thing. Everything that we do as a government, we need to look at it, is it the proper role of government? As I pointed out before, should government be taking money from one citizen and forcibly giving it to another citizen? Should government be taking money from citizens and giving it to businesses? And we say, no, that's a decision that people should make, which business they want to support, which charity they want to support. I think that by eliminating the property taxes, we can allow people and society to attract businesses, which is what we should be doing. What government should be doing is taking all of our road use taxes, using them on the roads. We should eliminate incarceration for victimless crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Gregg, you have 2 minutes to respond.
I understand Mr. Bell's concern about government, but there's a very specific role for government in many areas of our lives, and one of them is on our state's infrastructure. Indiana's got a problem in our state's infrastructure, and we all know it. Y'all don't have to travel to Evansville to tell you about roads. The truth of the matter is we are running about $300 million a year behind what we need just to keep up. Now, that doesn't include finishing anything else on I-69. My running mate and I, Christina Hale, have put out a detailed program with specifics where we go to the Next Generation Trust Fund, which is $500 million, and we leverage that money now while money is at an all-time low to come up with over $3 billion additional funds for the cities, towns, counties, and state for our roads and bridges as we're going over the next 10 years, and it creates 56,000 jobs. This is so important that we do that. 1 in 5 bridges in our state is going to be obsolete, not going to be able to be used in just 18 years. Now, we take this second pot of money and we create the Hoosier State Infrastructure Bank, because there are some other things that are real important. Drinking water, industrial water, wastewater, storm sewers, cultural trails, green spaces, broadband connectivity. Spend this money so local communities can borrow money. And this will allow them to use this to improve the quality of life issues to attract and retain talent. I'm real concerned about our state's broadband. 14% of the people in Indiana tonight don't have dependable cell service or high-speed internet, and we can't operate like that in the future. We need money for infrastructure, and our plan will put money aside so we can start talking about that fourth port down at Lawrenceburg, double tracking the South Shore from South Bend to Chicago. We can talk about finishing I-69, and we can talk about the new bridge between Evansville and Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. Mr. Bell, you can close it out.
Wait, I'm Mr. Gregg. I finished.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We've only spent about $10 million trying to get people to know who's who.
See what happens when I look at my notes. Mr. Holcomb.
I'm the tall one.
Yeah. It's all yours.
And I'm the hair-challenged one.
High five.
Well, if I may.
You may.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, I think Mr. Bell brings up a great point, and it drives at what kind of state we want to be and what role do you want your state government to play in your daily life. One of the things I'm most proud of, as I ticked through some of those statistics earlier about our rankings in the country, is it doesn't just represent numbers, it represents opportunities for Hoosiers, and we've been able to make so much progress. At the very same time, we've remained a free state. We're ranked the 4th freest state in the country. That is something to be said. For that, and at the very same time we've been providing this government service, we have done it at a 1975 state employee level. So we're leaner and cleaner and much more efficient in what we do. Absolutely, our infrastructure is part of the state's responsibility. And how are you going to pay for it? We have an honest disagreement here, Mr. Gregg and I, on how we're going to pay. I don't want to simply reflexively raid a fund. We worked hard to create the Major Moves program that was a $3.85 billion infrastructure program that took us from talking about I-69 to actually building I-69. Took us from talking about completing the Hoosier Heartland and Fort to Port, 2 bridges in Jeffersonville, another new bridge in Madison, and projects, local projects all over the state of Indiana that sat for decades. I-69 was talked about during the Korean conflict. We finally found a way to not just talk about it anymore, but to actually do it. And so absolutely we need to focus on a long-term, data-driven, sustainable infrastructure program that puts us out not just raiding a fund and borrowing. We're still paying on some bonds that were left to us from the time that the former speaker was in office. I don't want to just go down that route. I want a comprehensive, data-driven, not politically driven program.
Thank you. And Mr. Bell.
Well, I think a lot of this comes back again to the proper role of government. When they talk about bonds we're still paying on, and, when they tore down the Hoosier Dome, when they owed more on it than it cost to build in the first place. It's a matter of when government steps in things it shouldn't be involved in. We talk about the roads. Certainly everybody wants good roads and good bridges, but we can accomplish that by making sure that we apply 100% of the road use taxes to the roads. We don't need to be taking road use taxes and building walking trails. We talk about infrastructure in towns for water and sewage. Certainly that's a necessary item, but it's something that's tied in politically, and people are afraid to raise the rates enough to actually pay for the water and sewage. That's something that's wrong. Instead of running to the state government to get money for it, these companies should be taking care of that on their own. As far as broadband goes, for the government to step in and say, we're going to take care of this, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Now for our final round, we'll start with Mr. Gregg.
Thank you, and thank you for recognizing me. You'll hear a lot in this campaign about Indiana and the state of Indiana. I'm not one that accepts the status quo. I will grant and concede to both my opponents that Indiana has low unemployment, but it's nothing to brag about. Let's talk about the real actuality. The climate is we do have real low unemployment. The actuality is we've now dropped to 38th in per capita income. What that means for a family of 4 in Princeton or Fort Wayne tonight, that they're sitting down and they make $7,000 a year less than the average American family. We can do better than that. Our wages are growing slower than the rate of inflation, and they're growing slower than what they are in our neighboring states. They're going slower than what they are in Kentucky, here to the south of us. We need a plan that is in writing and detailed that focuses in 5 main areas, which I'll explain at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Now, Mr. Holcomb.
Well, the status quo is in large part why Governor Mitch Daniels got elected in 2005. I don't think that the reforms that we brought about, that I was associated with, proud to have been part of that new crew that came into the state government, we were operating in a sea of red ink, drowning in it, in fact. The status quo was pushed aside, and we set out for ethical reforms, we set out for infrastructure reforms, we set out to turn the state upside down, to get it turned around, and we ushered in a comeback. And they were because of reforms, some of which were very controversial at the time. But when you, back to that cynicism point that I made earlier, after you start building the roads and have paid cash for them, not borrowed, not bonded our way, not left it for a future generation to pay for, but when you actually have the ability to have your economy dialed in to the point that we have become a magnet, now we are outpacing the national average in terms of high-tech jobs. We are tripling the national average. So we have companies like Salesforce who are saying, we're going to hire another 800. Evansville, Indiana, which is experiencing this renaissance downtown. These are the things that are happening because we're not operating in a status quo mentality.
Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. Now to Mr. Bell. You have 2 minutes.
Well,
when we talk about the status quo, we've been in the status quo with some minor changes, for several years. We talk about the roads and what each administration has done, and maybe one does a little better than the other. We're still in a situation, excuse me, I forgot to pick this up. We're still in a situation where we're not doing all that we can do. We talk about being the fourth freest state in the country. I think we should strive to be the first freest state in the country. We talk about jobs and the wages being lower. Well, a lot of that has to do with not having enough jobs, not having companies have to compete for workers. Certainly, if we do away with the property tax and attract more businesses here, we're going to have more jobs. We're going to have people, not enough people to fill those jobs. That just naturally drives wages up. So that's something we can do that way. As far as having a lower wage scale in Indiana, we need to remember also that we have a lower cost of living here in Indiana. My son that I mentioned that graduated from USI moved to San Diego, California last year. He was down in Olive Branch, Mississippi at the time, and he told me he went from being one of the richest men in Olive Branch, Mississippi to being one of the poorest men in San Diego, California, and that can certainly happen. So we need to take a look at what we have in Indiana. I'm very proud of the fact that we can live cheaper here than we can in other places. Certainly we want to raise wages every chance we get, but I think we need to keep things in our mind in proportion as to where we are.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Gregg.
Hoosiers are working 2 and 3 jobs to get by. The number of people that are working 2 jobs is because we've not focused on high wage paying jobs in Indiana. Information technology, life and biosciences, 21st century logistics, advanced manufacturing, and the unbelievable changes in agribusiness. If you look at our detailed plan, you will see that we've got one with great details. We talk about establishing a growth and opportunity fund to unleash that entrepreneurial spirit where people seed capital can come to get money, and we certify venture capitalists. We also allow that credit to be increased from 20 to 40% like Tennessee and Kentucky have recently done. We allow the transfer and sale of that credit. There are so many things we can do. Study the taxes for sub-S as to how they affect our small mom and pop businesses. The Indiana Chamber of Commerce says that one thing we do have to do is be a welcoming community. And that means we do have to pass civil rights protection for members of the LGBT community.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gregg. Now, one of the great joys of my life, in addition to being a journalist, is serving as president of the American Society of News Editors. And one of our organization's tenets is the First Amendment and open government. And so this question is right up my alley. Indiana governors of both parties have considered open government records and meetings as vital to our society. A recent Indiana Supreme Court decision refusing to weigh in on whether certain legislative records were subject to public disclosure has been criticized as effectively shielding both the legislative and executive branches from the people's ability to learn what their state government is up to. Would you support more robust public access to the inner workings of government and court oversight? Why or why not? Gentlemen, you'll have 30 seconds to respond, and we'll start with Mr. Holcomb.
Well, I would, considering it's the taxpayers that pay for the office equipment that we use to interact and communicate with the public. Having said that, I want to make sure that if a constituent signs a privacy authorization form and doesn't wish for their private information to be known, therein lies the balance. But certainly if we're using public property to conduct public business, then the public deserves a right to see.
Our next response will come from Mr. Bell.
Well, certainly, this goes back to the pardon that we talked about earlier. The burden of proof should always be on the government. Anytime a citizen asks to know something about the government, they have the right to know that. It goes back to who's in charge. certainly the citizens should be in charge and not the government. I can't think of very many instances where the government would have the right to keep something secret from the people that are paying the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Now, Mr. Gregg.
The second policy initiative we put out was on open portal, open door, if you will, to those that are a little older. I 100% support it. I believe the more and more people know about government, the less they're going to fear about it. They ought to be able to see the tax dollars coming in and the tax dollars going out. They ought to be able to see the contracts and government business in real time. There's a great book by a gentleman called Anish Chopra called Innovative State. If you like reading about what open government can do, take a peek at that book. It's not the easiest read, but I think you'll find it enjoyable.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. And now for our final question of the night. Voters who've been following these three debates now have a good idea of where you stand on various issues. As we conclude these debates, tell us the most important thing about yourself that you want voters to remember as they cast their vote. Each of you will have 30 seconds to answer, and Mr. Bell will go first.
Well, I think, first of all, I'd like to say I'm very glad to hear that we're not going to have an open records problem anymore. Sounds like everybody's wanting to take care of that. The most important thing that I can tell you about myself is I believe in you. I believe in limited government. I believe that you can make decisions for yourself. You don't need the government making them for you. I want the government to protect you from force and fraud, perform its constitutional duties, and other than that, I'd like to leave you alone to live your own life.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. And now, Mr. Holcomb.
Well, it will be that each and every day I will serve as if I'm looking through your lens, through the taxpayer's lens. I take the job very seriously. I take the job of every tax dollar that comes into state government is a little less freedom for you and in your pocket. I also would want it to be known that I will continue to be strive to be the most accessible governor in the state's history. That's why I remain in perpetual motion. That's why I've gone to all 92 counties over and over again, so I know the issues and the people.
Thank you, Mr. Holcomb. And finally, Mr. Gregg.
Thank you. I'd like for voters to know that I have a passion for Indiana. And that passion comes from having traveled the state and having listened and talked with hundreds and countless of Hoosiers. That has helped us create a vision for Indiana and a detailed written plan. Our plan is based on what's best for Indiana, not ideology. And I can assure you as governor, I will be a uniter, and I will never embarrass the citizens or the state of Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. And thank you for just the tone and civility at which you have approached all of these debates. Wouldn't you agree?
Thank you. Thank you.
And thanks. Thanks to all of you for watching or listening. We want to give special thanks to the University of Southern Indiana for hosting this debate, television station WFIE for producing the program, and the League of Women Voters for keeping time for the candidates. I'm Mizell Stewart. On behalf of the Indiana Debate Commission, I hope you further participate in the electoral process by getting out to vote for the candidate of your choice. Good night. Thank you so much. Very well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for good humor.